Hello and welcome to Hamilton, the podcast. I'm Vinton Bayne.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
Today's episode, 1776, New York City. Pardon me, are you Aaron Burr, sir?
Well, that depends. Who's asking?
Oh, sure, sir. It's me, it's Vinton, I'm asking.
Oh, okay. I didn't notice you there.
So as the song starts, 1776, New York City. It's not completely accurate because there's a lot pushed into this one scene here. It's not really a chronological history, more of a narrative going on to introduce us to a few different characters quickly.
And each of those characters will get a stanza or two within this song where they get to share why they want to join the Revolutionary War, which is going full swing at this time, so that they can strike out and make a name for themselves. Our protagonist has made it to American soil, and like many good Dungeons & Dragons stories, the narrative begins in a tavern. The first interaction we see here is a conversation between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr.
Sir.
Arguably the two biggest characters in this musical.
Right, this is the meeting between our protagonist and our antagonist.
And we won't spend a lot of time on Aaron Burr's personal history at this point because he gets his own solo later on where he tells us about his own family history, but we will tell you now that Hamilton had a specific reason for seeking out this prodigy of Princeton College. What can you tell us about that, Vinton?
Yeah, so Hamilton wanted to, as we see in the song, advance and graduate quicker. He wanted to get through his studies and become someone and get finished, and Burr had done this already.
Right, he graduated Princeton College in 2 years flat, which was a very quick, accelerated course of study.
Yeah, I think if I remember reading correctly, he is part of the reason that probably made it harder for Hamilton to do so.
Yeah, the fact that he did it made a lot of other people not want to do it. And James Madison, I believe, actually went through Princeton, and he did a very quick, accelerated study right at around the same time.
Yeah, however, Madison did not do as well as Burr did with an advanced study.
Yeah, he got pretty sick, and if I remember correctly, he wasn't able to actually make his journey home when the semester was over because he was so worn out from pushing himself so hard.
And that's a big reason why the board said no to Hamilton's request.
Yeah, so Hamilton had a conversation with the president of Princeton College and wrote a letter to the board of directors for them. I think that this interaction with the bursar, the financial agent of the college, is actually just so we can get the famous rhyme in there. So, are you Aaron Burr, sir?
Yeah, we couldn't find anywhere to legitimize this punching of a bursar. If you actually happen to know of a historical event that occurred, please tweet at us.
Yeah, we'd love
that. Know.
And I wouldn't put it past a young upstart Alexander Hamilton to do this and come to blows with someone over this.
No, not at all.
But we definitely see that most of the correspondence, most of the histories we've read so far have just talked about verbal arguments in front of the board of directors to try to get into the school.
So why was Hamilton so eager to join the revolution?
As a kid in the Caribbean, he wanted to outgrow his circumstances. We talked during the last song about how he had this ambition, this drive, this hunger to advance himself in life so that he could get further than where he was. And he knew early on, because he was an avid reader of history, that there are few routes to popularity, to advancement, to success. He could either become a major politician, go the law route, be a strong business owner, or the fastest way a lot of the times is to become a soldier.
Yeah, I wish there was a war so we could prove
that we're worth more than anyone bargained for.
Right.
Which is a direct quote, not the whole rhyme, but he did specifically as a kid write, I wish there was a war so we could do this thing. It's kind of this thing, you don't imagine a grown-up person saying that they wish there's some type of stressful situation, but he was so used to conflict and stress as a kid, he wanted something that would give him a path to success because he knew if he could make a name for himself as a war hero, he could actually go somewhere, rise above his station after the war.
Right, and we also see in this same place, Hamilton learning that Burr is also an orphan. He gets very excited about this.
And you almost imagine that as he's approaching Aaron Burr, he's looking at him as this heroic type of person. He is a year younger than Alexander Hamilton in history, but he looks at him as someone who has accomplished something, of going through school so much. So when he finds that he has some common ground with him, that they were both orphaned as children, Aaron Burr even more emphatically orphaned than Alexander Hamilton was, you have to see that this camaraderie starts, and he looks for something like a friendship coming here.
Yeah, he definitely does. And he's actually thrown through a loop once he realizes what Burr's philosophy on life is. And it brings us up in the song when he offers him some free advice.
Yeah, talk less, Smile more. Don't let them know what you're against or what you're for.
And we're going to see throughout this whole musical, this is Burr's perspective. This is the contention between him and Hamilton.
It's interesting because Hamilton has the ambition and the drive we were talking about, and Aaron Burr has this exact opposite philosophy where he says, I'm going to wait to see how things play out in the end. I'm going to wait to see which side really wins so that I don't have to be on the losing side. Whereas Alexander Hamilton always opens his mouth, always speaks his mind, gives his enemies free ammunition.
You might even say that he runs his mouth off, which is the next line coming up here. Burr says, fools who run their mouths off wind up dead.
Remember the last scene, the very last thing that Aaron Burr tells us is that I'm the damn fool that shot him. So even if you didn't know about how this conflict is going to play out between Hamilton and Burr, it's already a little bit chilling that he's saying fools who run their mouths off wind up dead. It's almost like a veiled threat that's pointing to the end of this story. You'll see a couple of those scattered into Burr's lyrics as this show progresses.
And there's actually a second part to this line in the foreshadowing because Lawrence comes in now and responds to it. And he's the one out of the three that we're about to be introduced to who actually dies during the war.
In our first introduction to John Lawrence, Marquis de Lafayette, and Hercules Mulligan, we're going to see them grab some beer and start boasting about why they want to join the revolution, and they start talking about how they're better than the other. You imagine that they're getting a little tipsy, and they're kind of sharing the war stories and why they're so cool. John Lawrence grabs a couple pints of Sam Adams, and for you beer snobs out there, no, Sam Adams Brewery has not been around since before America started, but this is a nice little shout out to another revolutionary who otherwise does not make an appearance in this musical.
And Lawrence actually brings up an interesting line here that I think Lin-Manuel put in on purpose to connect it to today with the Black Lives Matter movement. I will pop chicka pop these cops till I'm free.
Yeah, there's this undertone of overthrowing authority, almost a Malcolm X style attack on the authority figures that are trying to keep them down. And John Lawrence is like, you will not keep me down. I will rise above the oppression. Vinton, what else can you tell us about this John Lawrence character?
So he was an abolitionist, and in South Carolina, he put forth the idea that slaves that would fight alongside the revolutionaries would be freed for doing so.
Right.
It was shot down, though.
Yeah, in South Carolina, their infrastructure and their economy is often this plantation-based concept that if you get rid of the slaves and free all of them, these farmers were terrified that they'd lose their position and their rights in their new colony.
However, this was an idea that the British ran with.
Right. Hamilton actually predicted that, interestingly enough, in one of his letters. He said, if we don't do this thing, the British will catch on to it, and they'll allow the slaves to fight for them against us, and they will promise them freedom. So it was an interesting conundrum where the British implemented John Lawrence's plan when a lot of the Southerners were unwilling to do so. So the second of these revolutionary characters that we were introduced to is Marquis de Lafayette. I love the way they're doing this scene. They're beatboxing for one another, they're drumming on the tables, and they're having a good time. Marquis de Lafayette takes his beer, he steps forward, and he sings, "Yes, yes, my friends, my name is Marquis de Lafayette." And he's singing in French because he's a Frenchman, right?
That's right. We have a connection to the French here. Lafayette comes over to America, and he's not received well at first from what I've read, but he writes a letter to Congress volunteering to fight in the military at his own expense, which is a unique thing because people were coming over from Europe and they were demanding high titles and lots of pay, but he was willing to do it at his own expense.
America's favorite fighting Frenchman came over here to tell the king, "Casse-toi." It's a really impolite way to say, "Get lost."
That's right.
And continuing their boastful battle over the beers, he says, "Who's the best? It's me. C'est moi." And the third of our new revolutionary characters is Hercules Mulligan, who introduces himself with the most hip-hop stanza in this entire song.
The most hip-hop and the least historical, probably.
We couldn't find anything historical about Hercules Mulligan as a sexual deviant in this area, but he is absolutely a force to be reckoned with in American history.
And this Irish immigrant actually housed Hamilton during his college years.
Some people even credit Hercules Mulligan as convincing Alexander Hamilton to side with the colonists in a lot of the revolutionary decisions. They would have these political discussions after dinner every evening, and Hercules Mulligan would actively promote the Sons of Liberty's movement, and Hamilton often heard about these things for the first time through the mouthpiece of Hercules Mulligan.
After these three boastfully introduce themselves and their reasons for wanting to join the revolution, they look over and see the prodigy of Princeton College, Aaron Burr, and want to hear what he has to say on the subject.
John Laurens looks over at Aaron Burr and says, "Give us a verse, drop some knowledge." He expects him to declare his allegiance for the Revolutionary War just as readily as those three had. But disappointingly, Aaron Burr is not the kind of man who opens his mouth and speaks his mind and takes a stand. He says, "You guys take a stand. You guys spit a verse. I'm just going to sit here and see what comes out of this whole thing in the end."
Right, again we see Aaron Burr's philosophy, talk less, smile more.
Don't let them know what you're against or what you're for.
And Alexander Hamilton, who was admittedly nervous at the beginning of this song with his introduction to Burr, is now responding with a little bit of boldness, saying, if you stand for nothing, what are you going to fall for?
And all three of these men are super impressed with this kid who was willing to stand up to someone who had a reputation at Princeton. And they're like, who is this kid? Tell us more. Tell us who you are and what you are going to do with your life.
And with that question, we're led into the next song, My Shot, where we start hearing this refrain that's going to be repeated over and over again and going to actually, again, foreshadow the duel at the very end with Hamilton saying, I'm not going to throw away my shot.
Here it means something very straightforward, that I'm going to take every opportunity that's put in front of me so that I can advance my life. I'm going to not throw away and not waste any opportunity that's put in front of me, whereas Aaron Burr is the one that's willing to wait for it and see what happens. Hamilton's not going to throw away his shot.
And like I said, it has that foreshadowing of this duel that ends everything. Throughout the whole musical, Burr is the one saying, I'm going to wait. I'm going to hold off. And Hamilton's saying, I'm not going to throw away my shot.
What happens at the very end of this entire musical, at the end of Hamilton's life, when they enter this duel, who throws away their shot?
It's Hamilton.
And Burr finally steps up to the plate and is going to say, he is not going to make an orphan of my daughter. He takes the shot. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but that is a theme we wanted to highlight now because it's going to follow us through the entire musical.
And I really like this line of, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. It really addresses where the country was at the time, the whole reason for the revolution, and then how individuals in that are feeling.
And it also shows that this young guy who's only been in America now for a couple years has already claimed this as his home. This immigrant is now fully embracing this, that America, the United States of America, is my country now.
And this next line, I'm going to get a scholarship at King's College.
I probably shouldn't brag, but Tag, I am amazed and astonished. Here he is picking up on the thing that Hercules Mulligan, Marquis de Lafayette, and John Laurens did. He's grabbing a beer. You imagine he's standing up on the table. He is actually announcing his own presence. He's going to tell you what he's done up until this point in his life and why he is amazing.
So like we mentioned before, Hamilton didn't get into Princeton College. He couldn't get this advanced course, but he did get into King's College, as he mentions here. Can you tell us a little bit more about King's College, Robbie?
Yeah, King's College eventually becomes Columbia College and Columbia University because after the Revolutionary War, being named after the king is not a very popular thing.
I imagine not.
King's College had a reputation for being a lot more conservative. Alexander Hamilton attends this school with a lot of loyalists, a lot of people. The president of King's College was loyal to the British throne. He didn't think it was right for us to get involved in these revolutionary activities. So Hamilton is there, and he has a really moderate conservative upbringing. And then he gets connected to these people like Mulligan, who are revolutionaries, and he takes a part in this movement and really kind of stands out against this conservative backdrop of King's College.
Now in the lyrics here, he mentions the streets getting colder, being famished. It brings up the double entendre for the hunger there, that hunger, that ambition, but also a physical hunger. He's not wealthy at this point. He's actually rather poor. But this physical hunger is nothing compared to the ambition and the things he wants to change, which he's about to lay out here, the problem, this next stanza.
Hamilton lays out this very specific complaint about taxation and King George's spending sprees and how the Revolutionary War is going to kind of play out. Famously, Hamilton actually writes a letter towards the end of his King's College days where he kind of predicts the way that the Revolutionary War is going to play out, where he kind of talks about the financial side of Great Britain and American colonies and the war strategies that America can play out. And he says in this stanza specifically, there will be a revolution in this century, and he's going to talk about how I'm willing to lay down my life if it sets us free. Eventually, you'll see my ascendancy. So we're back to talking about this path of being a soldier is actually a path to his acceleration and his growth in the American pantheon.
And with that, we see the other three men joining in here. They're agreeing with them in this positive tone in the chorus, saying, we're not going to throw away our shot either. They all join in the chorus.
They're like a family. They're a team now. They're the Revolutionary Soldiers, the Sons of Liberty, who are all on the same team, ready to lay down their lives if it sets them free.
Then Lafayette jumps in and mentions the unrest in France leading to anarchy.
Which is a pretty prophetic phrase. When we get to the second act of this musical, we'll talk about the French Revolution that came after the American Revolution, and we'll see how these two similar revolutions had very, very different consequences, and how the anarchy in France actually was very different from the order that ended up getting established in the American Revolution. But next you see Mulligan talking about his reasons for joining the rebellion.
He's a tailor's apprentice, but he mentions there's not a lot of social advance in doing that as a career path. So he wants to jump in on this train with Hamilton and follow that path and become something, do something with this during this revolution. Then the abolitionist John Lawrence speaks up.
And his very specific reasons for joining the revolution is that he wanted to make sure that true freedom came to America. He thought it was hypocritical to say we want freedom for these rich white landowners from the monarchy, and yet these rich white landowners are still going to oppress their black slaves at the plantations. He said, we will never be truly free until those in bondage have the same rights as you and me.
So they're all getting into it here. It's getting louder and louder, and Burr interrupts, saying, lower your voices. He's not agreeing with them. He's saying, calm it down here for a second. Let's all think level-headedly.
And yet he wants them to think he's agreeing with them. He's like, I'm with you, but look, you have to be rational about this. You have to go into this with the right policy. I'm with you, but the situation is fraught. You've got to be carefully taught. If you talk, you're gonna get shot. That's another ominous reference, maybe.
Sure is. To which Hamilton replies with this gusto, saying, look at what we have here. Why are you afraid of getting shot? Look at the muscle we're carrying now.
We got Mr. Lafayette, hard rock like Lancelot. I think your pants look hot. Lawrence, I like you a lot. John Lawrence and Alexander Hamilton became really good friends throughout the Revolutionary War. He's one of the most intimate friends that Alexander Hamilton ever had. You can get more details on that by reading the Ron Chernow biography. But they wrote essays against slavery. They were really two comrades in arms in multiple ways. They really had each other's backs throughout the war.
I like this next part too, because Hamilton gets really excited here. He's really into it. He's really pushing past what Burr even has to say, saying, where's the ammunition? Let's do this thing. And then he gets really nervous again all of a sudden. He's like, oh, am I talking too loud? Sometimes I get overexcited and shoot off at the mouth. He's like, I've never had friends before.
Right.
I don't know if I'm going to make you guys proud.
Remember how lonely his childhood was when he was having to fend for himself, get his own job as a really young kid. He literally hasn't had this type of camaraderie and brotherhood.
No, not at all. Then Lawrence responds with that great encouragement of a friend that really solidifies them here. He says, let's get this guy in front of a crowd. People need to hear him. They're all behind him to the point where not even is he an equal, but they want him out in the front.
Mm-hmm. Everything is getting louder here as the chorus is swelling, the chorus is growing, the company is joining along. They're saying, shout it from the rooftops and tell your brother that they got to rise up. Tell your sister that she's got to rise up. Tell everybody that when they're living on their knees, you got to rise up. When are these colonies going to rise up and take responsibility, to take ambition, to move forward and do something? And the whole company is shouting along, looking forward to what is going to come from this revolution.
And then the energy drops out of the song.
Yeah, Hamilton has this very intimate confession here where he talks about how frequently he's obsessed with the concept of death. He confronted death really early on when he was younger and living in the streets of St. Croix. A lot of things happened to him so that he didn't really get to have this peaceful life. So he's growing up with the very real possibility of death.
Yeah, he's counting the cost of what's about to happen here. He's realizing that he may have to lay down his life for this cause to change things.
And he's absolutely willing to do so.
Indeed.
In the middle of this whole thing, he has this little rant about finances, which is just kind of showing how much of a forward thinker he is. He knows that if you win this war, it's not necessarily a guarantee of freedom for their descendants. They need to handle their financial situation as well so that they can make sure that the state of the nation is secure past the war.
Yeah, he's questioning through some things. He's thinking forward, and it slowed down quite a bit, but then he solidifies it at the very end by jumping right back into, I am not throwing away my shot.
And it seems like the entire tavern is joining in with them as the company jumps on board and they're saying, I'm not throwing away my shot. I'm not throwing away my shot. The entire company is jumping in on this idea that we are all in on the Revolutionary War. They're getting on Hamilton's side, supporting this thing, instead of on Burr's, let's be passive about it. And it climaxes at this whole moment to the next song where Hamilton stands up and he leads them in almost a pledge of allegiance to this revolution, where Lafayette, Mulligan, and Laurens all repeat after Hamilton. And he says, I may not live to see our glory, but I will gladly join the fight. And when our children tell our story, they'll tell the story of tonight when we met in a tavern and found camaraderie with our brothers.
Right. Then there's the line, raise a glass to freedom, something they can never take away. We'll bring that up again in the reprise of this song later at the wedding. But then it says, raise a glass to the four of us. Tomorrow there'll be more of us. And it's just this beautiful idea of they know that they're on the right side here and they're going to build an army out of this to just go forward with their plans.
By now we've met Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, John Laurens, Hercules Mulligan, Marquis de Lafayette. That's a lot of testosterone on stage.
It sure is.
Lucky for us, next episode we're going to introduce the Schuyler sisters, some of my favorite members of this cast.
Thanks again for listening to Hamilton, the podcast. If you'd like to join the conversation with us about Hamilton, please contact us on Twitter. I'm Vinton Bayne at Flesh Eater.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker at Alpha Knight.
See you next time. This has been a Graphomania production. If you would like to hear more podcasts, go to graphocast.com, graphocast.com. Follow us on Twitter at Graphocast and like the Graphomania page on Facebook for news and updates.